murder.
And everything else.
My name is Joy.
My name is Cheryl, and Joy and I are two very old friends who are going to talk about murder and everything else. Murder today. Murder. Murder.
Murder. I just have to say that I was leaving to go volunteer this morning, which I do sometimes on a Sunday morning. And I was behind a minivan. And you know how I feel about minivans. I think they're awful. I think they're ugly. I think they're awful. I don't care if they haul 30 kids in them. I don't care if you can haul around a bunch of dead bodies. I don't care if you can put 12 dogs in the back. I just think minivans are awful. They're like, they're usually driven by people who don't understand spatially how large they are. The corners are always banged up because they're backing into you. And like, I don't know. It's just, and usually the people who own them have only one or two kids, but they thought, oh, I need to buy this giant car for two kids. And
Well, maybe they do carpools.
yeah, and I will say that I have a car with a third row of seats. It's a giant car, but I bought the car knowing it was a giant car intentionally. And it wasn't because, and I literally would not even look at a minivan. I don't care if your minivan gets the best gas mileage. I don't like minivans. But anyway, the back of this minivan had one solo bumper sticker. And you know that people who like bumper stickers tend to really go overboard. They never just have one. It's usually like every state park they've been to and all their political like affiliations and all their, like religious affiliations and how many A+ students their kids were. And so it's funny to just see one plain bumper sticker and it said, I used to be cool. And I just thought it was so funny and so poignant because I felt like I used to be cool.
Well, and wasn't it apropos that it was on a minivan?
Right? So perfect. It's like I used to be cool and then I bought this fucking car.
Why is it called a minivan? Is it really a miniature van?
It's not miniature anything. Those are big
yeah,
ass
so why
cars.
is it called a minivan?
I don't know, but everybody I know who has a minivan really loves their minivan and they defend them to the death, but I think they have to in order to like actually buy them. Justify buying those things. I don't know. If you have a minivan and you really love it, you should reach out, or if you really hate it, you should reach out to us at murderandeverythingelse@gmail.com and let us know about it. Just remember that this is not a podcast for children.
You should have said that before.
I guess, huh?
Oh boy. Lord.
Anyway, on that note, I am going to kick off our highs and lows this week. How about that? Usually Cheryl goes first.
Switch it up.
That's right. We're switching it up.
Keep everybody on their toes.
Guys, my high was that last night we had our annual block party for the people who live in our neighborhood. We have two little streets in our HOA and it was like 85 degrees outside. So I had to like go into my bags of summertime clothes and pull out some shorts and my sandals and we set up some tables and a canopy and people brought food and it was just generally a fun social time. And I love, and I don't know about you, but I love a good potluck. There is nothing quite like, and it reminds me, I know why I love it. It's because when I was a kid, I grew up in church and every Saturday we went to church and there was a potluck almost every Saturday after church. Those are the best Saturdays because we could pick whatever we wanted to eat. And as a child of a parent who was not very good in the kitchen, it was fun to eat other people's cooking because some of those ladies, man, and men, I'm sure men cook too. Some of them could cook. And so I love a good potluck, and it was a good potluck. Like one of the neighbors made this like baked macaroni and cheese where the top's crispy with the little like panko, like crumbles on top that makes it crispy, but then really like rich and creamy underneath. And then somebody else brought a bucket of fried chicken with all the fixins and the cold slaw and the biscuits and all that. And then another neighbor brought chicken wings. Anyway, it's the kind of potluck where you could go around once and then you could go around a second time because, everybody brought like two different things. It felt like the deviled eggs. And girl, I got to tell you, a potluck in the South is not like a potluck on the West Coast. I just got to say it. Like,
In what
it's
way?
like the food is like, and I'm not saying a Korean potluck because Korean potlucks are next level or Asian potlucks are next level because Asian, I got a special place in my heart for the Asian potluck. But a Southern potluck, you get the biscuits, you get the mac and cheese, you get the coleslaw, you get the barbecue, you get someone always brings the barbecue with the rolls, with the slaw and the sauce that you put on. I mean, so you're having the little sliders. Someone always brings the chicken wings that are hot off the grill. And then the desserts are next level.
Do
And
you eat chicken wings?
I did last night. Woo. And when you're at a potluck, you can go back for like two plates. Nobody's coming to a potluck with a half a dinner, right? Half a dish.
Right.
Everyone brings extra because you're going to a potluck. And so you can go back for seconds and third. I mean, it was like, ooh, I was like literally rolling up the hill to the house after the potluck. So that's my high. And my low is that on Tuesday, Buzz has to have surgery on her neck because she has this thing that looks like an angry ball. It's like a ball that like has an angry eyeball on it. It's just and it's huge. I mean, it's enormous and it's like I don't know. I'm not going to take a picture and post it on our Instagram because it's literally traumatizing. But she's almost done with her antibiotics, so I guess that takes care of the infection, but she's got to have it removed. And part of what makes it stressful is that Bruno doesn't like it when Buzz isn't here. He's literally inconsolable. He like runs from window to window looking for her and he whines the whole time
Oh
because
no.
because he loves her and he's so attached to her. She could care less about him.
Doesn't
But
she attack him?
yeah, sometimes, but he loves her. Like
Aw.
loves. I mean, talk about Stockholm syndrome. He thinks that she is the best thing, and so when she's gone, he's inconsolable. So he's going to have to spend all morning and all afternoon in the crate because otherwise he's just running around the house panting and generally acting crazy. So I'm
Aw.
hoping that she bounces back from her surgery. I'm hoping that she doesn't bleed all over the furniture. I'm hoping that they get it all out and that it's not cancer and that we can move forward without any more like ball sacks growing on her neck. So that's
Oh
my
my God.
low. What about
How is
you?
she acting though? Is she in
Oh,
pain or anything?
just as obnoxious as she always does
So
act,
everything's fine.
which my guess is she's probably feeling good.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's good. That's
So what
good.
about you? What are your highs and lows?
Well, my high is that my friend
Wait,
Alex,
wait. You're starting with your high. I just need to call it out.
I know because yeah, I don't know. I just feel like we're changing it up. You went first. I'm going second. I'm going to do my high first, which I don't normally do. But my
Oh,
friend Alex sent me this really great care package from Cheryl's Cookies.
aw.
No,
Cheryl
I
has
have
cookies?
no affiliation with them. Yeah, I've always heard about their chocolate covered strawberries.
Oh, I thought that was Sherry, like Sherry's berries.
Oh, is
I-
it?
Is it Sherry or Cheryl?
Well, I don't know. There's a Cheryl's Cookies. I
Oh,
thought, yeah, I don't know. All I know is it was from Cheryl's. It's spelled the same way, it's the same as my name, and that's why she and her husband picked it, which was really cute. But it was 3 boxes of yummy
whoa.
goodness. Yeah. And it was really cute because the boxes were all wrapped in Halloween themed wrapping paper. Well, you know what? You know what I
Aw.
loved? It wasn't wrapping paper. It's just like the movies. Do you ever see, you ever notice in movies when someone's going to open a gift, they just pull the top off? It like looks like
Yeah,
it's wrapped, but then they just pull the top off with the
it's a
ribbon and it,
box.
yeah. So it's a box and the top is decorated in Halloween theme, but it was like a smallest box on the top and a medium sized one and then a larger one on the bottom. And it's just filled with all this yummy goodness. But that was really sweet. I've had, a lot of love after this surgery. Um,
Aw.
yeah, so that's good. And then my low is also from my surgery, which um, my surgery is probably going to be part of our show for a while until I'm completely healed. But I'm going a little bit bonkers being at home, getting a little bit cabin fever. But yeah, so I was telling you earlier that I finally got all my hormones straightened out with my hormone specialist. And then I had to stop everything for 4 weeks after my
Ooh.
surgery. Just everything, is to limit the risk of blood clots. So, yeah, so I went from taking all this hormone meds and then completely stopping it cold turkey. So that has put in it's definitely affected my energy and my mood and all of that. And there's nothing I can do until I can start taking it again. But that's the irony of life. I just have to laugh at it because I finally got it all straightened out and now I have to hold off for 4 weeks, but it's okay.
Right. It
Anyway,
reminds me, you saying the word hormone so many times reminds me of that joke. How do you make a hormone?
oh God, how? What's the punchline?
Put sand in the Vaseline.
Oh God. Oh joy. Oh.
Anyway,
Goodness.
guys. So Cheryl, do you have any updates or shout outs this week?
No, I do not.
Oh, me either. Also, do you have any letters from our readers, Cheryl?
No, I do not.
Me either.
All right. That takes care of that part
And,
of the
and
show.
now the show is over.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And don't complicate your life by sending us any updates, shout outs, or letters from our
Man,
readers.
we don't have any shout outs.
I'm going to blame it on the hot weather. Anyway, so yeah, we don't have any shout outs this week, but that's okay. We'll probably have some next week. Right?
Well, maybe
I'm
after
gonna
today's topic, we might.
That's right. So guys, we are like our preamble this week is actually really like short and neat and tidy because we're not going to be like just blathering on about, like silly stuff because we don't have any updates, shout outs, or letters from our readers. But this week we are heading right back to murder with ugh, just some real like, gut-wrenching stuff. Don't we don't we have something exciting planned for you out listeners out there, Cheryl, right?
Yep, but we do right around Halloween. Um, so I, like many other people in the world, when this happened, um, I believed the headlines that these two spoiled rich kids killed their parents. And I kind of chalked it up to that. And it was before I really got into true crime. I think OJ Simpson trial, I think that's what really kicked off my interest in true crime. But we are going to talk about the Menendez brothers. Yes. And like I said, I always thought they were just two spoiled rich kids that killed their parents for money. And lately, Well, actually, this movement I've found after researching has been going on for about 2 years. So I'm really late to the party. But
Hmm.
what got me into watching and listening to hours and hours on end, days after day after day after day of listening to the trial that happened back in the 90s, was Rosie O'Donnell has a podcast, and she had Lyle Menendez on it. And I'll go into that a little bit later, but she is on this bandwagon, on this movement to let the brothers out. So like I said, I had never actually, I knew that it was one of the first times that abuse was used as a defense. Um, but I really didn't pay much attention to it until last week during my recovery from surgery. I had a lot of time, so I went back, and this trial is you can watch it on YouTube. It was Court TV that filmed it, and I took a better look and listened to every detail, and now I don't think they're just two spoiled brothers that killed their parents for money. And yeah,
Well, I have to just interject. This was like the first trial was 1993, so I was 24 years old. And I can honestly tell you that I didn't know anything about the court case and I didn't know anything about their crime other than the fact that they had killed their parents. But because they were on every radio show, every morning talk show, every news report, every I mean, they were on the front page of papers and magazines. And I will tell you that I knew about the Menendez brothers. I just didn't know the nitty-gritty. But I mean,
mhm.
I felt like they were one of the like first murder cases that like basically had like the entire nation like kind of in their grips as far as like wondering what happened, wondering what was going to happen next, and everyone was talking about it.
Yeah, it's the first televised high profile, well, televised trial. So everyone, yeah, I think, because of the media coverage, everyone was into finding out what happened. But yeah, like you didn't know I didn't know very much. Like I said, I just believed the headlines. I just, and chalked it up to that. But so I'm going to talk about that today and get your opinion on it. And I know people are not going to have hours on end to watch the trial like I did. I didn't even watch all of it. The trial was 6 months, the first trial. So there's Kevin was like, "You're going to watch the whole thing?" I said, "No, I'm going to pick and choose what I'm watching." But I
Mhm.
definitely watched Eric and Lyle's testimony. Um, so my sources for this were 2020, YouTube, Court TV, Los Angeles Times, UPI Archives, and ID Crime Feed. So Joseph Lyle Menendez, who went by Lyle, was born January 10th, 1968. He's aged 55 now. And Eric Galen Menendez, born November 27, 1970. He's 53. Are American brothers who were convicted in 1996 of the murders of their parents, Jose and Mary Louise Menendez, who is also known as Kitty. At the time of the killings, Lyle was 21 and Eric was 18. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty were in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion when Lyle and Eric entered the den carrying shotguns. Jose was shot 6 times, including the fatal shot in the back of the head. Kitty was shot 10 times in total. Before the fatal shot to her cheek, she was on the ground, slowly crawling and moaning. Lyle then ran to his car to reload and then fired the fatal shot to her face.
Ugh.
Eric and Lyle Mendez began serving life sentences without the possibility of parole after they were convicted of murdering their parents in 1996. The brothers were held at separate prisons until 2018 when they were moved to R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility.
Where is that correctional facility?
I believe it is in California. This happened in California, right?
Okay.
You can look it up while I'm talking. Um,
Yeah, it's in San Diego,
San Diego.
California.
Okay. On April 4th, 2018, Lyle was moved into the same housing unit as Eric, reuniting them for the first time since they began serving their sentences nearly 22 years earlier. The brothers burst into tears and hugged each other at their very first meeting in the housing unit. The unit where they are housed is reserved for inmates who agree to participate in education and rehabilitation programs without creating disruptions. During the trial, the brothers stated that they committed the murders out of fear that their father would kill them after they threatened to expose him for years of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse, while the prosecution argued that they did it to inherit their father's multi-million-dollar estate. The Menendez case became a national sensation when Court TV broadcast the trial in 1993. Represented by their legal defense lawyer, Leslie Abramson, the brothers stated that they killed their parents out of fear for their lives after a lifetime of abuse at the hands of their parents, especially sexual abuse at the hands of their father, who was described as a cruel perfectionist and pedophile. Meanwhile, their mother was described as an enabling, selfish, mentally unstable alcoholic and drug addict who encouraged her husband's behavior and was also violent towards the brothers. Lyle was abused by his father from age 6 to 8. Diane Vandermolen reported the molestation of Lyle to Kitty. So Diane is a cousin, and she lived with them for a little while. She would help. Actually, her testimony is riveting too. I encourage you guys, do what I did. Just pick out the stuff that you want to watch. It's a 6-month trial, so you're not going to be able to watch every single thing. But before this time when she stayed with the Menendez family, she really liked visiting. She liked her aunt and uncle, and she enjoyed going for short visits until she actually lived with them. And Kitty pretty much made her housekeeper, her babysitter. She said it was awful, and she left early because she couldn't take it anymore. But so they put Diane in the basement, and there were 2 twin beds in there, and that's where she stayed. And one night, Lyle came to her and asked if he could sleep in the extra bed down there. And she said, why? Because he had his own room up in this mansion. And then he reported the abuse to her. And so Diane tells Kitty, the mother, she reports it, because that's what you would do, right? You'd go to the mother. So Lyle comes to her, reveals this thing that his father has been doing with her. Diane, the cousin, goes to Kitty, and then Kitty comes down to the basement, and she yanks Lyle by the arm, and she takes him back upstairs, and then Diane never hears anything else about it.
I'm just curious. You refer to the house where they lived as a mansion. Um, does it go into, were you able to find out, like, what did the parents do and why were they so wealthy?
Yeah, so what's his name? Jose. He was a guy that was described as he was ruthless, and he knew how to make things happen. So he ended up being like this mogul in the TV and recording industry. And so that's where he made a lot of his money. But anyway, so after the cousin reports it to Kitty, the abuse of Lyle stops. But in the interim, Lyle is on the stand, and he's talking about how after his father did these things to him, which included using foreign objects like I think he said like the handle of a razor, of the shaver, and toothbrushes and things like that. He used to, penetrate Lyle with these things. Then Lyle would take Eric out to his brother Eric out to the woods, and then he would do the same thing to Eric. And on the stand, now there were people that said that they were faking and that they were the best actors in the world. And I'm telling you, I would ask you to watch and tell me if you think these guys were faking. When Lyle is testifying to what he did to his brother, they pan over to Eric and he is distraught. I mean, one of the reporters was like, the vein in Eric's head was like popping out of his head, and he was holding back, like just completely bawling. Um, it's heart wrenching to watch.
Well,
Um,
and weren't so the crime happened in 96 when the boys were what 18 and 21, but they didn't go to testify until 93. So, I mean, I imagine this is probably one of the first or second or third times besides talking to the attorneys, one of the only times that they've actually like, had to like cover all this stuff like
in
in a public
yeah,
way in front of a jury, in front of a judge, in front of like reporters, in front of like
cameras.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I remember hearing people say those guys were the best actors, and I was like, well, if they were really good actors, why haven't we seen them in anything until now? I mean, really, it's not like I mean, if
No,
they're
yeah,
if their
yeah,
dad was in like the movies or the TV industry and his sons were really good actors, wouldn't we have seen them on like I don't know, the Hogan Family or like Silver Spoons or One Day at a Time or any of those millions of TV shows that had kids in them, Little House
yeah.
on the Prairie, Sesame Street. I mean, seriously. Like why didn't they pop up in anything?
Yeah, and if you watch the testimony, it's these guys aren't acting. And like I said, I always chalked it up to I just believe the headlines. They're spoiled rich kids, and then they put on a good performance in court. And when you watch it, you're like, no, no, no. There's so much here. But they actually the murders happened in 1989, so they were in jail for 4 years before it went to they were on trial.
Wow.
Um, anyway, so Lyle testifies that he told his mother about the abuse and that until he was 13, she also sexually abused him by inviting him into her bed. And she said on the stand that he would touch her everywhere. And,
That
you know,
she would touch him, you mean?
no, he would touch her.
Oh.
And he
Well,
thought, so Kitty always hated Lyle. Kitty hated Lyle. That's the first, the oldest son, because she wanted to be a movie star. She had all these dreams, and then she got pregnant. So she always blamed Lyle for like ruining her life. And then the father has this fucking fucked up relationship with Lyle. And even though it was illegal and immoral what he was doing to his son, the mother was actually jealous of it. Isn't that sick? I mean, it just keeps getting
yeah,
sicker.
but
She was
remember several episodes ago when we were talking about I don't even remember who it was, but again, it was a husband and wife that you'll have to remind me because I can't remember or keep them straight, but a lot of these relationships they work in tandem. I mean,
mm-hmm,
that's the dysfunction. The father is the abuser. The mother is also complicit in his abuse because she has to be in order for this to work. Because imagine if she just went to the cops the first time she found out about it, that would be the end of it. But she has to be complicit. And then what she has to do is she has to perpetrate her own abuse in some way, whether it's keeping silent and allowing him to continue, whether she's also abusing the children in certain, I mean, or she's playing good cop to his bad cop. I mean, if you think about it, these are relationships that work in tandem with each other. So
mm-hmm.
it makes perfect sense. And, also, the thing that's because I imagine it's just going to get worse, this story, before it gets any better, which is basically the better being that the boys are rotting in prison. But I'm jumping ahead. But I will just say that, I feel like if these boys were to go on trial in 2023, we would be having a very different trial than we had in 1993.
No doubt. And if they were girls,
Ex-
yeah, people say that.
exactly.
If they were girls, they would not
But
have
even
served this
but
much time.
even that, there would be telltale signs. There would be psychological profiles done. There would be like a search for any kind of scars or any kind of like, where they might have been like scarred or hurt, and doctors would testify on, how those marks were made, and they would be looking at like, what kind of mental like stress it places on a child to be subjected to this kind of, torture for this many years. I mean, so I think about all those things and I think, we're so much less um judgmental. We stand so much less in judgment of like adults who commit crimes like this, who've been subjected to years of abuse, than we are, like people who just snap one day and, I
Yeah.
mean, so I think that, because we know so much more, but it's really like kind of a sign of the times of how these boys were vilified by the press, and probably still are by a lot of people.
Yeah.
Also,
That's
I feel like the Time's Up in the Me Too movement also moved the ball further down the road, as far as like, let's not wait until 50 women come forward saying that Bill Cosby is a creep. Let's wait and say it when one woman comes forward. And so I feel like we have a lot, you know, less interest in like throwing the victim under the bus and actually listening to the victim.
yeah, no doubt. Like so Lyle's interview with Rosie, he talks about that. He's done a lot while he's been in prison. He he's in part of a program to help rehabilitate the prisoners before they're released, because he said, he and Lyle have seen people come and go while they're still in there, and then the rate of recidivism is really high, and so he's trying
Yeah.
to help turn that around. He was part of a program to build this huge mural in the yard of the prison to give, so that, I mean, I know he realizes they're supposed to be in there because they're being punished, right? But if you treat people in a way, that it just makes life so bleak for them, they're not going to come out healthy, So anyway, he's done a lot while he's been behind bars. But getting back to his mother, so he was abused from starting the age of 6. So everybody, you got to, if you don't have any knowledge, just you have to remember, this is one thing, the in the defense's closing, which I really liked. There were 2 separate attorneys for, there was one attorney for Eric, one for Lyle, and then also a prosecutor for Eric and for Lyle. But one of the defense attorneys said, you can't look at them now as they are now. They look like grown men. You have to remember, when this was happening, they were little kids. And
Right.
these were people that they trusted. This was their mother and father. I mean, they had to look to them for everything. So Lyle lies in bed with his mom, and she would tell him she hated him. Okay, she would tell him he ruined her life. And imagine growing up with that in your brain day after day. This is how you're treated, right? So he's thinking he can make his mother love him by touching her, because this is what he's learned from his father, right? So he's
Right.
touching her everywhere. And she would also bathe him when he was a teenager, when it's no longer appropriate to be bathing your son. And he would
Mm.
say that she would wash him everywhere. But anyway, his thought was maybe she would love him if he did these things to her, or with her in bed, and on the stand he said it made it worse. She was even more horrible to him, which, I mean, imagine being a kid and just not knowing what to do. Everything you do is wrong. Like you just
Mm-hmm.
can't win. So then Eric gets up on the, oh my God, Eric's testimony. So Eric says he was abused from age 6 to 18. So 18 is when they killed the parents. And this
Mm-hmm.
part is just horrendous. And there are things I'm not going to go into, because it's just too, it's too, it's too horrible. It's
Mm-hmm.
just too horrible. Uh, but one of the things that the lawyer, the defense lawyer, went into was the way Eric categorized his abuse from his father. And I am going to go into this. So if you guys want to, if you don't want to hear this, then fast forward like 30 seconds. Um, because he had 4 types of abuse from his father. And he never knew when his dad came into his room which it was going to be. But one of the abuse, one of them was called knees. And this is when it was oral sex. So when he was giving his father oral sex. Nice sex was when his father's attitude was nice and the father was having sex with him. Plain sex was when his father would sodomize him. And rough sex is when his dad would bring in a rope, a knife, needles, and tacks.
Yikes.
So his father would say that Eric was a crybaby and he needed to sort of man up and whatnot. So when he would, during oral sex, needles and tacks were stuck into Eric's butt and upper thighs. Can you believe that? Like he would stick him with these things to toughen him up.
So I'm just curious, like, did it ever come out in the trial, like from the snippets and things that you read and the things that you saw, were there any scars that were consistent with these things?
He does have a scar from incident with a knife.
Okay.
So let me just go back. So Eric said his father's sexual abuse began with the massages of his genitals at age 6, and it progressed into other sexual acts until about 10 days before the fatal shootings in the Beverly Hills mansion in August 1989. He said rope was used to tie his penis and testicles. A kitchen knife was used to cut his thighs, and so I do think he has a scar from that.
Mm.
And make him bleed. Needles and tacks, like I said, were stuck into his buttocks and upper thighs during oral sex. It was a type of pain train, Eric said of his father's reasoning for the intense abuse. My father said I was weak and too easily frightened, and I showed my pain too often. The only time he stood up to his father, he said he was met with the same large hunting knife used in the violent action movie Rambo. The large knife, which Eric said his father got from the entertainment company he worked for, was displayed to jurors. He testified that he said no to his dad's orders to get on his knees. He put the knife at my throat and said he should kill me, and next time he would kill me, he said. The younger brother said he never told police about the abuse because he did not want to destroy his father. So this is the thing. So their whole life, they love their parents. They love their parents. They're not coming into this as a stranger and going, "Oh, these motherfuckers." These
Mm-hmm.
are these are their parents. They've been with them their whole life since they were born, and they've grown up with this fucked up reality, and still they want to protect them. They want to protect
Right.
their parents. They don't want the secret to come out, right? There's fear, right? They're growing up with fear and lies because they don't want to out their father or their mother. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then Eric had also testified that Kitty would occasionally inspect his genitals. She would tell him, I'm going to check you out after, his encounters with his father. And she would like find blisters and stuff, and she would pop, like he'd have things on his genitals that she would pop and whatnot. All
Ew.
I know is, it's
I'm going to be
obvious.
right back after I go throw up.
I know. So Eric thought he would get away from his father by going to college. But Jose told Eric was going to sleep at home at night. So, because Eric was so excited, like, because really, I guess the only thing you can do is age out of this thing, right? And then be able to, like, move out. So he thought he was going to live at the dorm. And then when his father was very powerful, and he had this way about him that people just could not say no to him. So he somehow, like, intercepted that or made it not happen. And so then Eric found was going to live off campus. And then when Jose caught wind of that, he somehow, was able to ruin that too, and told Eric, no, you're going to live at home. You're going to come home at night. You can go to school in the day, but you're going to come home at night. So Eric was distraught because he's like, I'm never going to get away from my father. Right. This was his hope. This was like, I'm going to get out from under this by living away from them, living away from home. And his father destroys all of this. So he is distraught. And so Eric finally tells his brother Lyle, hoping to get some help. He had always looked up to Lyle. The family dynamic is so complicated. Like, Lyle was the athletic one, he was the smart one, he was the firstborn in a Latino family. So the father, like, adored Lyle. The father adored Lyle. He ignored Eric, except for the sexual. And then you get all into this. Eric's like, that's the only thing that he has from his father are these sexual encounters. Otherwise, is invisible to him. So imagine what that does to your psyche, right?
Yeah.
So then, the mother hates Lyle and treats Eric like he's a dumb shit. I mean, it's just awful. Okay. But so Eric is distraught because he's like, I'm fucked now. I thought I was going to be able to get away with this. And he finally shares his abuse with Lyle, who he has not told this whole time. Mm-hmm. Lyle says he kind of suspected, but that's all I know is that Eric goes and he finally shares the abuse he's had at the hands of his father for years. He shares it with Lyle, hoping to get some help. So Lyle confronts Jose, which is a huge deal. They never went against their father, but Lyle is protecting his brother now, right? So that gives him, like, the impetus to, like, confront his father, which he would never ever do. But he also goes a step further and says he's going to expose the abuse if the father does not stop hurting Eric. And Jose's response is, if you tell anyone, I will kill both you and Eric.
Oh my God.
After Lyle confronts Jose then tries to attack Eric in Eric's bedroom for telling Lyle about their secret. And then Eric escapes somehow. He's running down they testify to all of this. He's running down the stairs, and Kitty, who's downstairs, sees him crying hysterically, and she goes, she tells him she knows why he's crying, and that she knows what's been going on with him and his father, and that she's not going to help him because no one's ever helped her.
So do you think that Kitty was also being abused by her husband?
There is no testimony or evidence to that, other than he was very controlling of her. But so now Eric if he was distraught before, he is destroyed now, because he's like, my mother knew this whole time. The poor guy. I mean, he thought he was going to get away. His father's like, no, you're going to live at home while you go to college. Goes to Lyle, trying to get some help. Lyle confronts the father. The father's like, you tell anybody outside here, I'm going to kill both of you. Goes, you know, Eric's distraught, and then the mother just like cold-heartedly says, "No one's ever helped me. I'm not going to help you. I knew all this time what was going on." So, and then she tells Lyle, "You've ruined the family." And throughout this, all the testimony and everything you read and hear from family members of the Menendez family is appearance was everything, everything to Jose and Kitty, everything. They did their homework. They did the kids' homework, Lyle and Eric's homework, because they didn't want to be embarrassed at the school that their sons, weren't A+ students. So for Lyle to threaten that he might expose the secret that was just not going to happen. So
Right.
this is where the brothers say they were in fear for their lives. And that's what happened that night. It wasn't, that they suddenly wanted their money, and they really thought that they were going to be killed, because it all came to like this crescendo, and they really
Right.
thought they were going to be killed. Um, So let's go to July 17, 2023. New evidence may back Menendez brothers' sexual abuse claims, but can it free them? The first trial, July 1993, lasted 6 months and ended with 2 hung juries. In the end, the verdict was split. The women voted for manslaughter and the men for first-degree murder. The men accused the women of being too soft on the brothers. Eric and Lyle each had separate juries and separate lawyers. There were separate prosecutors for each brother as well, as I said earlier. In the second trial, the judge moved to block all expert testimony on the abuse, quote unquote, what was called abuse excuse defense, a decision that would profoundly affect the direction of the case. So this was incredible, because one of the jurors on the first jury, during the first trial, said that the defense put on, I think it was like 50 witnesses, several of which were experts, and they talked about how this kind of abuse affects a child, a person.
Mm-hmm.
And the juror, it was a female juror, so she had voted for manslaughter. Um, she said that the prosecution didn't have any rebuttal witnesses. They didn't have any expert rebuttal witnesses to oppose what the defense's expert witnesses were saying about how abuse like this can affect you and make you fear for your life. So she said that was huge in her decision. And then the judge blocked all this expert testimony. And a lot of the abuse testimony did not come into the second trial, which is fucking
That's
amazing.
crazy. That's
Also,
just crazy.
that's crazy. So
Again, I also feel like a lot of that is a sign of the time
mhm,
when this trial took place. I mean, if you think about it, all of that discovery about like the abuse that happened, and that would like look at Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
mhm,
Was that her
yeah,
name? Yeah.
yeah,
For example, she got 10 years because they showed that the trauma that she withstood, because her mom was like obviously mentally like, like nutsy, and was
mhm,
like torturing her, basically, pushed her to, find this guy to date who would ultimately end up killing her mother. But and and now her sentence has been reduced, and she's going to be released, or is released. I
getting
mean,
out early.
yeah, getting out early.
December. Yeah, yeah.
But again,
It's
Gypsy Rose
the
Blanchard is a woman. That's
yeah,
the other thing.
exactly. That's why a lot of people say if this had been 2 women, 2 girls back in 93, the outcome would have been different. They probably would have served time like Gypsy did, but not. These guys have been in behind bars, I think now, from the time that they were arrested, it's like 34 years. Um, but so incredibly, so in the first trial, there was manslaughter and first-degree murder. Were the 2 charges that the jury could vote for. In the second one, I don't think manslaughter was an option. So, and then they took out most of the abuse defense. So, um, So they were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wow, I saw that. I was so blown away because I didn't know any of the story of their childhood and their abuse, and I find it so hard to believe that the jury would have completely disregarded, I mean, life without the possibility of parole. I mean, just disregard everything that happened to those boys as children growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to have, like, completely I don't know, it just seems so crazy.
Yeah. And oh my gosh. So the reason people want, you know, things, new evidence to be looked at is because recently a letter was discovered that Eric had written to his cousin Andy, and in it he says to Andy that he was still being abused and he was afraid. Okay, and this was back when he was a teenage. This was like, I think he was about 14 or something. So it corroborates. It's not like a letter that was written after the murders, right? It was way a long time ago. Eric had said it to his cousin Andy. Andy had tucked it away. Andy's had died recently or a couple of years ago, and his mother, Eric and Lyle's aunt, found it. And he talks about the abuse. He shares it with his cousin. So it's, it was written a long time ago. Also, what's coming out now is allegations made by a former member of the boy band Menudo, because Jose Menendez, I think, was, I don't know if he was in charge of casting, I don't know, but he was involved with that band somehow. And one of the boys says he was raped in the 1980s by Jose Menendez when he was 13 or 14 years old, and that
So
comes out.
wow. I just wanna go back really quickly. Did this guy Jose have brothers and sisters?
Hmm.
And if so, did they ever talk to them or bring them on this witness stand and talk to them about Jose's childhood and upbringing and what caused him to, like, not cause him, but basically what happened to him as a child that then steered him kind of on this path of being like this like hideous, serial abuser? Because I mean, obviously, just based on the kind of trauma that he perpetrated against his own children, it does make me wonder if he also had the same kind of abuse perpetrated against him. And
I
his
read,
siblings would be the perfect people to talk to.
yeah, I read something that that he was abused by his mother, but honestly, I didn't go into too deep into his family history, other than the people that came on the stand. Um,
Mhm.
so so there's corroboration of the sexual abuse from the cousin Diane, who was staying at the house, the one that was in the base, her bedroom was in the basement, and Lyle had shared that with her, and the cousin Andy. And this this part of Eric's testimony just made me so incredibly sad. Andy testified that when they were about 11 or 12, I think Eric's a couple years older than Andy, they were playing. Andy was his best friend. Eric didn't have a lot of friends because he was very withdrawn, and shy. And they said he was, so they had family testify how Eric used to be really outgoing and, just a normal, happy kid. And then it changed. And we can understand why, right?
Mhm.
And he became very withdrawn. So Andy, his cousin, was his best friend, and they were playing, and they were out in the woods, and they were playing "Run from the Russians" or something. It was really cute when he said it on the stand. But Eric says to Andy, he goes, and you're just picturing these young boys having this discussion. It just broke my heart. Eric says to Andy, "My father massages my penis," and he tells Andy, he says, "Is that normal? is does your father do that? And it's just so sad. These two innocent boys who are really trying to figure out if this is normal. And then
Mhm.
Andy, whose parents were had been divorced, I don't know how recent it was to that incident, but he goes, I don't know, my father's not around. It just made me want to cry. This Eric's going, is this normal that my father's touching my genitals and saying he's massaging it? And then you got the other boy going, I don't know, my dad's not around. Just awful. Um, but Eric had said that to him, and then a short while later had written that letter that was discovered a couple of years ago corroborating this. Um, there's stories, there's not just stories, but there was testimony, I should say, that oftentimes Jose would be in Eric's room for hours, and and then he'd come out and say, "Oh, that Eric wasn't feeling well and he wasn't coming down to dinner." So one of the stories was a family friend. They had gone to so Lyle and Eric were into tennis. Lyle was really good. Eric, I think, was pretty good, but he just wanted to do what his brother was doing because he looked up to him so much. But they had gone to some tennis tournament somewhere, so they were staying in a hotel. And this woman was on the stand. She's a friend of theirs, and they had watched Eric's uh, match. And sometimes Eric would just the pressure. So Kitty, it's just there's so much detail to go into, but like at practices and stuff, Jose would be yelling, screaming at them, and they had testimony from coaches that were just like, he was the worst father I have ever worked with, as far as a tennis parent. They were just like, he was just horrible. But anyway, so Eric had a bad match, and Eric had his own hotel room. Kitty and Jose had their hotel room, and the friends had their hotel room. Well, the woman who's testifying says they were supposed to go to dinner around 6:30, and so she and her husband are waiting, and they call, and they're like, she said it was like 7:30, quarter to 8 now, so they're over an hour late. And Kitty's like, "Oh, Jose's still talking to Eric," and like almost 9 o'clock. First of all, while I was watching this, I'm saying out loud, honey, I would have gone and eaten without them. I mean, it's so late. It's almost 9 o'clock now, and she's still waiting for
Yeah.
Kitty and Jose. And so finally, almost 9 o'clock, they meet out in the hall, and Eric's not with them. And she asks, is Eric coming? And Jose is like, no, he's not feeling well after spending hours in his hotel room with him. And so the woman was like, well, I want to go, and can I go in and at least say hi, and give him a hug? Because she felt like he probably felt bad after his performance in that match. And he was like, no, Jose forbade her to go and see, go and see Eric.
I think we've come a long way since this, but all those parents who came into contact with that man and that woman, Jose and Kitty, and they probably all smelled something was up
Mm-hmm.
because, this poor boy and all the things that are happening to him and the parents being very controlling and the things they would say, and the coaches saying he was the worst father and then cousins knowing things and relatives knowing things. It's so upsetting to think that at no point did anyone like follow up, call the authorities, report the father, report the mother, because I mean, enough calls go in about somebody, and something has to be done.
And do I think, because we've talked about how being rich, having money can keep you out of jail for
Yeah,
murder. I mean,
sure.
I would think their
Oh, sure.
status and, their bank
Yeah.
account.
I mean, we
I
have
think it had a.
constant daily reminders, people who have been indicted 4 or 5 times for a litany of things, and if you got enough money and the right attorneys, you can sit there and act like a complete nincompoop on the stand, and, and you've got an entire entourage of idiots who believe everything you say.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
go
Well,
figure.
So yeah, it well, and also they it's so complicated because they prided themselves on being quote unquote the picture of a perfect family, but that picture was shattered. There were people that were close to them that saw all of this stuff, so it's just very tragic. But a petition filed on behalf of the brothers in Los Angeles County Superior Court in May of this year argues the new evidence directly challenges the argument prosecutors made during the trial that the murders were about money and that Menendez was quote unquote not the kind of man that would be abusing his sons. They want the convictions vacated or a new evidentiary hearing. The shootings were not murder but manslaughter committed out of an honest though unreasonable belief in the need for self-defense after a lifetime of sexual and physical abuse, the motion reads. On June 15, 2023, a judge asked the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office to file an informal response to the request before a judge rules on the habeas petition. Habeas is used to bring a prisoner before the court to determine if the person's imprisonment is lawful. A spokesperson for the DA's office said is reviewing the Menendez Brothers case files in order to answer the judge's questions. The petition could be the last shot the brothers have at revisiting their convictions in life sentences. The new revelations could also be a test of how society's views of sexual abuse and its impacts have changed over the past 3 decades. After years of legal debate and countless movies and TV miniseries recounting the grisly killings, would prosecutors, judges, and juries view the allegations of abuse in a different light, and would it change the outcome? So just like you were saying earlier, we've come a long way. And one of the things that Leslie Abramson, do you know her? She's this feisty woman that's got this, like, she looks like she stuck her finger in a hair socket in a light socket. She's got like this frizzy blonde hair, but she is like a little firecracker and powerhouse. But during her closing argument, she said to the jury, which I thought was very very astute, that she said, because their whole job was to convince the jury, right? And this was back then when it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't accepted, or there wasn't a lot of knowledge about abuse. And she's trying, she and this other attorney, their job is to get to these people and convince them that a lifetime of this can affect you. And one of the things she says in the very first part of her closing argument is she tells them the law is delayed in catching up with what we know. What psychology has revealed, the law is always behind. So I just thought it was incredible she said that, because they have to, she read a lot of the what the judge gives them to take back to the jury room, where they have to really go by the law, like sentence by sentence, and it puts them it pigeonholes them, right? Because it's so all this legal mumbo jumbo. And so she's trying to tell them that basically that you might not find it in this document, you know what I mean? Like, just our laws just are behind. And
Right.
And I just found that so profound, because it's true. And also, this was, I've mentioned it before, but these were boys. Not only were they boys that were being abused, but it was the father that was doing it. It's so people back then could not, men just didn't do that, and so
Right.
like that's did I even say this? I might have gone off and not said it, but when Lyle was talking to Rosie, he said, yeah, I didn't say it. I went off on something else. He was like, with all that's come out, I mean, it's not a good thing, but it just kind of like supports their case. But with all that's come out about priests and young boys,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, that wasn't out back then. So people could not, so that's why the jury was split, women and men. Men went for first degree murder, and the women believed the abuse put them in fear of their lives. But the men were probably thinking, I would never do that. A man would never do that, especially to a boy. You know what I mean? So it's just freaking.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, if the trial were held today, the evidence likely that evidence would likely be allowed, the abuse, right? I don't know why it was allowed in the first and then not the second. I don't know how the judge was able to do that. Our understanding of sexual abuse and the impact of sexual abuse, especially a lifetime of it involving children, is much different. The sexual allegations would have meant a conviction of the lesser charge of manslaughter rather than murder. After 27 years behind bars, it also would mean freedom would be possible. If the petition moves forward, attorneys will have to show why the letter and Rosello's testimony, Rosello is the Menudo boy,
Mm-hmm.
weren't introduced at trial, a prosecutor of law at UC Berkeley says. After their convictions, Eric and Lyle Menendez pursued unsuccessful appeals. Years after the convictions, the murders and allegations of abuse have divided not just the public, but Menendez relatives, some of whom have advocated for the brothers' release, and others who have brushed off claims of abuse as a ruse to skirt responsibility for the killings. Milton Anderson, Kitty Menendez's brother, told the New York Times that he has never believed the allegations, but Joan Vandermolen, Kitty Menendez's sister, said she's hopeful the petition will get her nephews released. So I mentioned that I started watching the trial because Rosie O'Donnell has a podcast, but also in 2021, ABC's 2020 had an episode called Inside the Menendez Movement, and a lot of TikTokers, so the younger generation who are more open to all of this, they have started this movement. So you'll find a lot of the young TikTokers who are rallying for the Menendez brothers release.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Rosie said that she believes them. They were horribly abused by their parents. They did the unthinkable, which had been done to them day after day after day, and they paid the price for that. O'Donnell also took the time to urge her followers to help free the Menendez brothers, again adding it's time. This is June 26th of this year. So Lyle had reached out to Rosie O'Donnell, but she didn't respond. But she says that she knew they were innocent, and she said she wasn't ready at the time to respond to him and wasn't ready to openly support and advocate for them. She said she was afraid and wasn't ready to touch the subject. And, it was 1996. In 96, in the late 80s, people weren't ready to accept the fact that boys get raped sometimes by their fathers. And as a culture, we ridiculed them. In 2019, O'Donnell revealed that she was sexually abused by her own father, who died of cancer in August 2015 at age 81. She continued in the video, jokes about them on Saturday Night Live, jokes from Jay Leno every night. Everyone thought this was a funny target to kids who had been molested since the age of preschool, fighting back and standing up. And people thought they just wanted the money. They had the money. They didn't need the money. Money was not what it was about. So,
Okay, I just have to stop right here and interject something. And it's about this Saturday Night Live and Jay Leno and David Letterman and every
did you
other
see
talk
any
show
of
host.
those? Did you see any of
Yes,
those?
absolutely. And one of the things I just have to say is, and I've always and I've said this about Monica Lewinsky as well. Monica Lewinsky has was like the first case of like extreme cyberbullying, and yet we all let it happen in plain sight. And every comedian, I mean, you think about the fact that a 22 or 23-year-old young woman became the brunt of grown ass man's jokes
Mm-hmm.
on the
Mm-mm.
regular. Jay Leno was in his 40s and 50s, and he's cracking sexual jokes about a young 20-something woman, and they turned it into the Monica Lewinsky scandal when she was single. I always say, she just like, why didn't we call it the Bill Clinton scandal?
Right.
He was the guy
Exactly.
who was married.
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
unfair. It was like awful, horrible, horrible cyberbullying. And the fact that now just opening an attachment can be, you can be like fingered in a court case for cyberbullying, and yet you've got grown men and like entire TV shows like SNL poking fun at a young woman who, I'm surprised that Monica Lewinsky is still on this planet because of the way she was treated. And to this day, I remember saying to someone, imagine someone bringing a girl home and saying to their parents, I want to introduce you to my girlfriend. Her name's Monica Lewinsky, and watching the parents' reaction. I said, she will never, ever, ever, ever be able to have a first impression with anyone. Anyone. And I
Yeah.
said, it's awful because, again, she was single.
Right.
She, I don't care if you think that like messing around with a married dude is right or wrong. The fact of the matter is he was the one that was married. So I also use this like as an example, like with these boys, the Menendez brothers. Everyone laughed at the jokes. Everybody saw these stand-up guys use them for material. I didn't even know why they were in prison. So it makes me sick to my stomach to think of all the miles that they got using these
Mm,
jokes and the
yeah.
Monica Lewinsky jokes and anyone else that they poked fun at when, it's like we're talking about people's lives here. These guys have been in prison for over 30 years. It's not like they were in prison for a couple of weeks. Also, they were children
They were
that were
so
like
young.
horribly, horribly traumatized by their father and their mother.
Hmm.
And so I know some of them have tried to make amends, but some of them, i.e. Jay Leno, I haven't heard his apology series, you know?
Yeah.
So I shame on them for like, racking up the ratings on the backs of these two young men and other people who allowed them to like continue their illustrious careers, their funny jokes, their yucks, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And Lyle, he was asked about it. He saw those skits on SNL and he said it hurt. Of course it hurt. Can you imagine? They didn't want to have to tell the world their secret, and then
Right.
to be ridiculed like that must have just been just awful. I just want to end on something that Lyle said. He did an interview with Megyn Kelly on Today Show, July 11th, 2018. And he says it's really a regret every day, a regret every day. But at the same time, I can't escape what happened any more than I can escape the memories of what happened to me. He continues to insist the sexual abuse drove him and his brother to kill and calls his father, Jose, monstrous, but confessed that he has mixed feelings about his mother, Kitty. He says, I love my mother and I still cry over my mother and I don't forgive her. Her life ended and our lives essentially ended, all because of this fateful decision. There had to be a series of decisions she made of not to tell what was happening. What kind of mother lets it happen?
It's
Lyle,
the it's the monkey. It's the wire
yeah,
monkey. The mother was the wire monkey.
yep. Lyle testified his mother often flew into rages, threw things, and screamed, You're a bastard. He said she resented the attention his father focused on him and told him at the age of 7, I wish you were never born. We were afraid, he says. Um, the thing that the defense attorneys said in interviews, and I think even on the I think even during closing, was they had to they knew that proving the fear of the father was obvious was easier than the mother. They knew that the jury was going to say why kill the mother. um and like I said, you don't unless you don't understand, if you don't understand it, then it's not going to make sense. But there's so much material. I'm telling you, I watched and listened to the testimony for hours on end, on days on end. I listened to it right before I fell asleep, which is probably not good. But
Oh God.
there's so much
Yeah,
detail
I
that
haven't heard from Cheryl in like 2 weeks, and so I can tell you, I know for a fact she's probably been holed up in her house watching murder after murder after murder trial. But I will just say also, I mean, a question I have, and that is, did I mean, I guess I would have to go back and watch some of the footage. I guess I just like I can't. Yeah. I mean, how about their teachers? Did any of their teachers like make comments or statements? Because again,
Just
there's so many people that children come into contact with. And I will say that as a parent and as a former teacher, there's so much behavior, there's so many behaviors that are consistent with children that are experiencing trauma. And so I just wonder, like, besides like friends and classmates and cousins and nephews and uncles and aunts,
yes,
what
they
about like
had
teachers
they
they
had
came into
a
contact
lot.
with?
They had a lot of teachers, and every single one of them, um, there was no visible abuse, signs of abuse. So they testified to their behavior, but most of them, it's not funny, but it's just outrageous. All of them had something to say about the parents, but that they were awful. One lady was like, I have never been so disrespected. I'm a
Mm.
professional. And she goes, the way Jose talked to me was, she goes, I've never been so offended in my life. So they all testified to how horrible they were as people and controlling they were of their sons, and that they put on this facade that their sons were perfect. But that's, what can they do? There's not enough. Everybody testified to how horrible they were, and how horrible, as far as, like, one of the lifeguards said that Kitty would drop Eric off at the community pool and leave the whole day. And he was young. He was really young, and he would be by himself. And when he was swimming in the pool and she was there, she'd be walking up and down the side of the pool, like screaming at him that he had to go faster. I mean, I don't, is that enough to call? See, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It was just not enough. You know what I mean? They
Well,
were
and
flying under the radar.
the other thing is, remember, until a certain point in time, the saying "spare the rod and spoil a child" was a parenting belief. So
Right.
if you didn't beat the shit out of your kid, if they looked left or right, then you were spoiling your child and you were a negligent parent. So corporal punishment of all forms was perfectly acceptable as long as you didn't like break the skin. And I got to tell you that, like, that is obviously, at least in my book, I mean, that's a complete crock of shit. You don't have to hit
Yeah.
a child for a child to learn the difference between right and wrong. And you don't have to hit a child in order for a child to not be spoiled. So there are, and I'm sure there are people out there who don't agree with me. I don't want to know who you are. So don't reach out to us at our email with any of that kind
It's
of
the first time we're
information.
asking you not to reach out. No, but
That's right.
this is the thing. I don't think there was anything that they did that would have warranted someone calling. Like, they're not going to see that controlling, um, maybe verbally abusive, because people heard, family members testified that Kitty told Lyle how much he ruined her life. They heard that. But do you call CPS because a mother said that to her son? You know what I mean? Like, no one's going to make the leap from that to what Jose was doing to Eric with
Right.
the knees, rough sex. I mean, no one's thinking that. So it's just really awful. But one of the other things I wanted to say, because you're talking about, like, verbally abusive and people witnessing this. One of the things that Lyle said when he testified, which really, like, gave me the chills, and I totally understood, because I'm telling you, my mom was not abusive, but when she was quiet, that made me scared. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Lyle said that on the night of the killing, he came home and his parents were in the den. That's where they were killed. But he said hi, and he said hi to them, and they always responded. And he said they didn't say anything to him. So he felt they're already thinking their parents are going to kill them. And now he's like, oh, fuck, it's going to happen tonight, because they didn't even answer him. And he says it's never happened before. So he went up to the room or wherever he went, and he was super nervous because he's like, they're acting weird. They're acting weird, you know? And so he goes, I decided to try it again. So I went back in and I sat down. His father was on the couch. He sat down, I guess, on a love seat next to it. And he tried to spark up like small talk because he felt uncomfortable with the silence. And I totally could get that. You know, when he testified, I could picture it. He said his dad had been wanting him to get into some kind of program. I don't know what it was, but he decided, oh, I'm going to just spark up this conversation about it. Like he was like, hey, Dad, can you give me that number to the, the whatever it was, that program. And he said his father goes, why? What does it matter now? And he freaked out. So, you know, it's like you have like them screaming and yelling at them, telling them how stupid they are. And then you have silence on the other end. And that freaked him out more because it was not how they normally act. So anyway, but I do want to say this. If you or anyone you know has been a victim of sexual assault, help is available. Visit the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network website or contact RAINN, RAINN, National Helpline at 1-800-656-HOPE, 1-800-656-4673.
Wow. That's a heavy, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, and this is only really like scratching the surface. I would really, if you guys have hours on end, watch some of their testimony. You tell me if you think they're acting. Oops, sorry, I just hit the mic. Well, I'm hoping that they are released soon. But tell us what you think, you guys.
Yeah, tell us what you think about the Menendez brothers. Anybody over the age of probably 45, 50 or 50 remembers this case. I mean, it was like, it was big time news.
Yep.
So
it's the first televised one. But like I said, there's a whole movement of young people who are looking into old cases. So that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I will say that not so much this case, because I feel like there's so much of this case I didn't know about, but I will say that like on other things, it's like I feel like sometimes saying like do a little bit more than a Google search though. Like dig a little deeper, watch trials, etc. Cuz like I don't know, I'm very skeptical when people say, well, the TikTok generation, again, I understand there's a lot of you out there. I'm not a TikTok person, but who knows? You know, stranger things have happened. Maybe I'll become one.
You never know.
Well, Cheryl, even though this was a doozy of a murder case and a doozy of a crime case, you know what else is a crime?
What's that, Joy?
That we are out of time.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, and don't complicate your day. All creativity, commentary, and opinions in this podcast belong to Cheryl and Joy. Music composed and mixed by Gabe McKeon. Logo and merch created and managed by Kevin Callan. Podcast editing and advertising by Joy McKeon. Legal representation provided by John Bojezek. Please like, subscribe, follow, and listen. You can listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube, and you can email us at murderandeverythingelse@gmail.com.
Bye, fishes.